Hi, my name is Jess, and welcome to today's webinar on tracking revenue for your practice. Conducting today's webinar are Kathy Caspero, the head of our SWAT team, who has 30 years of experience in practice management, and Jason Barnes, our Chief Operating Officer, who is responsible for the billing performance for 500 practices. Welcome, Jason and Kathy.
Oh, thank you for having us. We're really excited about this whole series of webinars that we get to put on. And more importantly, Jess, is that we're more excited about helping the entire chiropractic profession. When it comes to running a practice these days, we understand how many balls that a practice owner has to juggle. And for those of you on the phone today, we get to personally hear those stories. Kathy, who I've worked with now for 4 years, and I get to interact with practice owners on a regular basis, talk to them about their frustrations, about their successes, the things that really drive them, and the fact that the mission that the entire chiropractic community shares for changing healthcare is really the main driver, makes the talk of money seem sometimes misplaced, but we know that without a solid financial backing, that mission will never be realized. So we want to start from that perspective today and really make sure that by talking about money, we can help achieve that dream, that mission that we share with chiropractors. And Jess, let's get to the next slide here. We want to start out by helping practice owners understand what we're trying to do. As an organization, we help practices in a number of different ways: scheduling, billing, documentation, and practice management. But today, we want to focus on the revenue portion of that. But you can't break out just the billing without talking about your scheduling process, the intake process. When you're talking about sealing revenue leaks, looking at the entire practice as a whole has to be part of the approach. And Kathy and I, working together over the last few years, know that when you're talking about office workflow or billing workflow, they're really the same conversation most of the time. We separate them in this context to help people understand that when you're looking at lower collections than what you're expecting, that can be a frustration. It can be scary because we know practices that can't last for more than just a few months without righting that ship. So today we want to focus on understanding where in your process the breakdown occurred so that we can specifically identify it and then figure out a plan to solve it. But identifying it is without a doubt the first key. So knowing where your reimbursement gets stuck. You know, as Kathy and I have worked together, Kathy, when you talk to practices, what's the biggest frustration you get from practice owners when they're not realizing the collections that they thought they would have?
It's whether or not, they can continue to, treat their patients the way they want to, be able to continue with their mission. So the frustration is that they need to bring in the money in order to continue that mission, to help every patient that they have in their practice, and that's going to be a problem for them.
Yeah. So when that fluctuation happens, maybe their heart's not into treating the patients the way they wanted to because they're worried about whether or not they can keep the doors open. We've actually had those conversations. I don't want to be over dramatic about it, Kathy, but it's unfortunate. We've seen people forced to sell their practices and become, move backwards back to the role of associate while they figure out how to attack the problem again.
Right.
So we want to help people avoid that. We want to see the chiropractic profession really explode, and I think we're in a good position to help there. So keep in mind, I'm just going to recap as I go through this. Coming up with a process that's repeatable for your office workflow, your intake process, is the only way that sealing your revenue approach that we came up with works. If you don't have a set process, then there's really difficulty in trying to diagnose it. But you have to make sure that you understand which metrics you're looking at. So some of the examples that we're talking about today is CPT codes. Am I in or out of network? Am I going to get paid a certain amount? Do I know what that amount's supposed to be? We need to ask those questions and then be able to track the data across many months. And we deal with the smaller, one chiropractor, part-time front office practices, and we've got the 10 locations. I've got 22 chiropractors, 6 physical therapists, I've got weight loss, and I need to make sure all of that's running together. So the difference between them is actually really, really small, because the intake process, the data collection process that you have to follow is nearly identical. But now we have to track whether or not the breaking points are the same, and in our experience, they've been really, really similar. So, Jess, can you hit the next one for us? We know that you can't operate and fix a problem at the same time. So the amount of time that it takes you to come up with a root cause analysis of where your practice went wrong is critical. It's critical to you enjoying a family life or work outside of your office. Kathy, with some of the more complex problems, how much time does it take to actually figure out where the process is broken in a practice does it usually take?
Jason, in some cases we've had where it's taken a couple of weeks because there's so much data that we need to go through to assess a practice. Having the right tools in place for ourselves and for the practice to analyze certain areas that we just need to focus on is always helpful in this.
Yeah, and so we're going to ask Kathy to help us here in just a second, because she is an expert at taking the data of practices and analyzing it and figuring out where it's gone wrong. So if there's payment delay, if you're a Blue Cross Blue Shield provider, a Medicare provider, what is the average turnaround time? And if yours is above or below average, why? If you're sending claims out that are getting rejected 50% of the time, how do you know that? How do you address what to do differently on those claims to increase the percentage of acceptance by the insurance company and payment? What is your practice doing to analyze that right now? Or are we simply letting the cards fall where they may? We want to be able to attack that. So you've got that potential to repeat errors if you're not. So we want to make sure we reduce that or mitigate that to the lowest level that we possibly can. We know we're in a fight with the insurance companies, and especially chiropractic. Any specialty, Kathy, and you know this better than anyone, any specialty that likes to see repeat business like chiropractors do is seen as the insurance company's biggest enemy. How on earth are we attacking the regularity and the repeat claims that are going out? How do we approach making sure that those claims are as clean as possible?
Well, Jason, even talking about this now, this is critical to business today. And with the onboarding, everyone can take a deep breath. With the onboarding of ICD-10 changes coming in, and, we have the Affordable Care Act and changing in insurance, now is the most critical time to really put processes in place to find out, which insurance companies are going to be slowing down in their payments so that are taking longer to process claims when we get over to ICD-10. It's critical in that case. So, right now the tools that we use really focus on payers and CPT codes, and we focus on both the number of claims that are submitted out to a payer and making sure that those expected amounts, the expected allowed amounts, whether they're in or out of network, are being received by that practice. So, what we're going to be talking about is the billing status report. It's a critical tool to use and to put in place for any practice right now, so you can balance the payments that you're going to receive from, say, Aetna today and Aetna in July and August when they start ramping up to ICD-10, and really focus on the one payer that's not following the protocols to pay us within a timely manner.
Yeah, and billing stats was short for, obviously, billing statistics. And when we talk about billing statistics, what can you give us a few examples of the statistics that you look at most commonly with practices to make sure that they're on the right track, or at least their baseline is where you think it should be?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's critical that we always look at the payers, find out what the demographic is in their payer, which is the largest percentage. Does a practice submit 50% of their claims to Medicare or 50% of their claims to Blue Cross Blue Shield? So first we look at that, and then we start to measure the CPT code. So how many 98940s are they sending out to a particular payer, and what's the reimbursement time? Is Medicare paying in 14 days, and are they paying the correct allowed amount? So the critical things that we look at are definitely payer and CPT, and looking at when the claim was submitted and the payment back from the insurance company.
So it's pretty complex, I know, because I've done it thousands of times. Without a tool, without something that allows you to organize this data at a click, how long, what's the time difference between doing it manually and having some sort of automation? Because there are a lot of systems out there. I know it's critical that somebody has the ability to do this, but what's the time difference in organizing this information between automation and manual?
I can tell you from experience. I mean, I've worked in practices that had one clinician. I've worked in practices that had up to 12 clinicians. Being a COO myself and having to analyze that data, it didn't just take one or two people, a practice owner and, and myself, to figure it out. It took a team of 6 people, months in some cases, to run through reams of paper and running AR reports to find out where the money is. By that time, it was sometimes too late to go back and get the money.
Too late. I think that's what we were looking for, is sometimes it's too late. So if somebody has a revenue problem right now where they feel like they're seeing the right amount of patients, and this is an experience that we have all the time. I'm just as busy as I've ever been, maybe even busier, but the money's not coming in. What is your advice to someone, Kathy? What's the first step you take them on to diagnose this problem?
Well, the first thing we do is really take them through a patient life cycle. We go through how many patients they're seeing, how many new patients they're actually seeing, and we rely on the goals that they set for themselves. Did they want to see 12 new patients a month and they're not getting there? Did they want to have, 200 other patient visits? Is that where we're falling down? And then is the insurance change, has that mix changed? So we have to look at prior statistics, and we have to make them relevant to today. So we always go back 12 months and take a look.
Gotcha. So what I like about your answer, Kathy, and it always goes back to a workflow. We can't ignore the fact that your plane has to stay in the air while you're fixing the engines on it. So if there's a problem and you're not looking at the process that you're following, at the same time you're analyzing the data, you're most likely going to miss the fact that you have to make an immediate change. So I really like that. Jess, can you go to the next slide for us? So that process is so important to us. And here is a way that we've organized a process to look at. And so when a claim is created, this is looking at really a claim life cycle, not a patient life cycle like Kathy was just describing, but when you load a claim, what happens to it? In an automated system like the one that we prescribe to people and we promote, and hopefully you're on a system like that, you're going to scrub that claim prior to it going out. What if Medicare doesn't pay for certain codes? You need to send them anyway, but are you going to, what are you going to do with those charges when it comes back? Do you know how the system's supposed to behave? Are you going to handle it manually? With new G codes that are out there, with functional reporting, do you have the right charge amount? If you don't, you're just making it easier for the insurance companies to delay your payment by sending you back a rejection 30 days later, or maybe longer. Some of you may have just snickered, maybe longer, and letting them win at their own game. So we want to make sure we open that claim up to a whole bunch of rules, we validate it, we submit it. And before it gets to the insurance company, we want to make sure it passes all of those tests. So having a process, and each one of those boxes represents a place where we can check to see that a claim is getting stuck. So when you're talking about sealing your revenue leaks, you have each one of those gaps to look at. So in your own system right now, whatever system you're using, if you don't have checkpoints where you can look and see where things are getting stuck, diagnosing your problem can be very, very difficult. So if you're having an intake process, that means an intake problem, your claims are most likely going to get stuck going out the door because you're going to see missing information, missing referrals, missing authorization numbers that we want to check on before it goes out the door. If it comes back rejected, we need to manage those denials. Kathy, what is your approach with all of our billing teams right now when you see denials coming back at an alarming or above average rate for a payer or a practice?
We look into really what the root cause of that is. You know, is it actually a payer? Is it a clearinghouse? We try to focus on, you know, where the root cause of the problem is coming from. You know, this straight through processing that you're demonstrating right here, specifically a claim lifecycle. Let me tell you, this would have been so much help 15, 20 years ago when, you know, I started and was doing claim entry. And, you know, there aren't a lot of practice owners that are familiar with coding. And, you know, I would have loved to have a system scrub my claim and kick it out ahead of time so I could, you know, add a modifier or look at the note before it went out to make sure that it was coding appropriately. So, you know, root cause analysis is always the way to go for us to find out, you know, where the problem is.
So there's one thing I've got to add to that answer, Kathy, and something I get most excited about is don't do it alone. If you're trying to manage a billing department on your own, our advice is become part of some network. Well, we've got about 500 practices in ours. When a practice in Nebraska sees that Blue Cross Blue Shield made an adjustment to a policy or a way that they're posting or some way that they're managing rejections because of blue or black ink, whatever it is, we're able to learn that for that practice in Nebraska on Monday, and by Tuesday morning, we've applied the fix to the other 499 practices across the country.
Yeah, I have a real-time example of that too, Jason, believe it or not. First thing this morning, we received, I would say probably somewhere around 3,000 rejected claims from our clearinghouse. And if we didn't have the technology that we have, we wouldn't have been able to jump all over those claims, get a hold of that clearinghouse and find out what was wrong and get it fixed. You know, it allowed us to do that in a very short period of time.
So sealing the leaks of revenue in your practice, to recap, is first starting with a repeatable process, understanding where your gaps are, and then third is making sure you're part of a network of people that are working together to beat the insurance companies. That's one of the best ways that you're going to have a chance at being successful. And we are big fans of a network. There's so much that we learn from our providers. We position ourselves as hopefully experts in the industry, but we know that there's no one person or one group that knows it all. Jess, could you go to our next slide, please? So here's an example of one of the reports that we're talking about. Now, there are 45 different parameters that we monitor and check, and then we can put any combination of those parameters together. There's one example up there of CPT code by insurance company and then following that is the diagnosis code, where we can see which diagnosis codes are allowing which CPT codes to get paid by which payers. So we can filter down to a single diagnosis code or a single CPT code, or even just one payer if we want to, and then really take a deep dive into how they're behaving over time or in a snapshot. So we want to be able to help practices understand what's happening. How does that help? If you're treating patients, obviously you're not going to change the way you're coding. You're not going to change the way that you're choosing CPT codes. But when you have a choice, that falls in the middle between two CPT codes or two diagnosis codes, you'll know which ones are accepted by the insurance company based on the data. You're not going to be able to attend every webinar. You're not going to be able to listen to every coder's advice or pay for the consulting services that you need. But when you're able to look at the data and you know which ones are getting paid and which ones aren't, you're then able to make very educated choices on how you're going to proceed. You might even be able, Kathy, please chime in here, you might even be able to go back a little bit. And
you might be able to go back a little bit, yes.
And so you have to be able to organize the information that way. Otherwise, you're going to leave money on the table. And leaving money on the table, we know, leads to treating less patients. We understand that you need to maximize your time. There's that other aspect, Kathy, where if the balances aren't right, you might be telling the patient that they owe more than they do.
Correct.
And those patient relationships, we know, are the most valuable thing in your practice. The referrals that they make, the confidence that they have, not only your ability to treat them, but your ability to set expectations and understand the financial arrangement that you've got is critical to your success, and we take that very seriously. Jess, can you go to the next slide, please? So the question is when do you take the deep dive? We are not recommending that you look at this report every day, weekly, or even monthly. Kathy mentioned earlier that you set goals and that we work with practices when those thresholds are being approached, either good or bad. And we want to make sure there's a trigger point. In our organization, we use a visual trigger point. We set goals with our providers, and then when those providers are not reaching those goals, they're able to see it in a picture right on the home page. And they either can use this report themselves or work with us to take a deep dive into these reports and figure out why their collections are not where they want them to be. What is it about their workflow or their process that's not working that needs to be tweaked or fixed? Today, Kathy, real-world example, we had a provider in California ask us this very question. And it turns out that one of the doctors in their office is, on an average, billing 4 months later than the dates of service. That will put a lag on anyone's cash flow. And so, for sake of anonymity, I'll just call him Dr. Lewis. Dr. Lewis is going to have an important conversation today from the practice owner that's going to help them fix this moving forward. And that's one of the things that your billing stats report can really show you when you know one of those thresholds is being met. Jess, we always do this to you. We're almost out of time. I believe there's one more slide. Yeah. And so here is the final kind of list of configurable parameters that we have. And you can slice those up in any different way. In our system, anyway, you can easily choose them and create the reports as you need. For instance, today with that practice owner, we chose the rendering physician, the submission date of the claim, the status of the claim, and then finally which payer it was. And we found out that there were certain payers that were waiting 5 months and not all of them. So it was really important for us with that practice this morning. And Kathy, I know I did it to you. We're out of time again. So, Jess, I'm going to just turn it back to you to go over the Paycom portion of it, then we can open up for any questions.
All right. Thank you, Jason. Just to let you guys know, if you are trying to receive the CEU for joining our webinar today, you're going to receive a really short survey. I think it's like 2 questions. Once you fill out the survey, you'll receive the certificate, so you can use that to get your credit for this webinar.
All right, thank you so much. Jess, were there any questions that were waiting typed in? I know there normally aren't many of those.
No.
Okay. Anybody have any questions before we end today? Jess, can you unmute the
phone? The conference has been unmuted.
Any questions that we can answer for anybody? All right. Well, awkward silences are rough, and I know it's hard to speak up in front of so many people, but thank you so much for attending today. It's really our pleasure to talk about this. We're passionate about practice success, and especially when it comes to our chiropractors and their mission to help the world change the way they look at healthcare. And so we're hoping that your practice, especially in this new year, is able to thrive and take off. And if there's any other help that we can be, check out one of our blogs at genesischiropracticsoftware.com, and it's a great way to reach out to us. Thank you so much, guys, and have a wonderful holiday.
Thank you. Please stand by.